welcome to another edition of The Watch Collector. My name's Ollie. We've got a privilege today, and that's I've got the gentleman Asbjørn next to me, who's one of the co-founders of Atelier Holgur. We're going to have an in-depth chat with him about the formation of the brand, where the inspiration came from, and ultimately we're going to dive into, and I use that word deliberately, their collection of watches and what they've created over the last 3 years or so. Asbjørn, pleasure. Thanks so much for joining.
Nice to meet you.
For those eagle-eyed of you, I'm not going to do an obligatory wristwatch check. You'll see if you can work out what I'm wearing, but it will come out in a later video. Asbjørn, thanks so much for joining us. I've looked into the history of your brands, and I've already had the pleasure of looking at your watches in depth, and I was a big fan. Before we jump into this particular model, can you tell us a little bit of where the inspiration came from and how you kind of brought the brand alive to where we are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started three years ago, almost exactly in I think May, actually when I was on paternity leave and I had a little more time on my hands. Always had an interest in mechanical things, and then I started looking into how does one go about making a watch? It's a little bit of a bold thing on paternity leave. But then I pinged my very good friend Matt, so the second co-founder who's a resident of Singapore, and then that was kind of the magic moment. So one WhatsApp message led to this kind of journey, you could say. Historically, or in my background, my grandfather Holgur, so this is where the name derives from, right? So he was a watchmaker by trade. I think he was trained maybe in the 50s, and then he worked for his whole life with Swiss watchmaking. But actually also his father before him was also into watchmaking. So one of the memorabilia, one of the books I have is there, like a teaching book of watchmaking dating from 1862 or something like that. So like a novelty for me, which is in my family, you could say. I can't say that I'm a watchmaker by trade. But no, I think that's kind of the very first of it.
And unusual from the heritage of being Danish as well. So
there's not that many Danish heritage stories out there, and we can say it is a legitimate origin story. It's not made up. It's
a pioneer, as it were, of that. And so your grandfather was working in watches in the late 1800s, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So if I get it right, but I definitely have a photo from my great-grandfather from 1896, I believe it is, where I'm sure the gentleman will show a photo of that after the video. Some very old-school gentlemen holding big clocks up. And then his son, Holgur, was then trained, I believe, before or after the Second World War. And then that's when he then worked with watches, like throughout his career. Of course, he was hit in the 80s by the battery, the quartz movement.
Quartz crisis, yeah.
Right. So he also got into silverware and these things. But his livelihood was definitely all to do with watches. So I have a lot of photos from him in the workshop, and I remember vividly when I was a kid. I was born in the middle of the 80s. I remember like at the end of the 80s going into his tool shop, all these magnificent objects on the shelves and all that. It was I don't know. There was a long period in my life where watches didn't take up any mental bandwidth, but I think it was always there in the back of my mind.
I think there'll be some of us who agree that it probably takes up too much bandwidth, and I may well be one of those. It's pretty special to think that you've created, with your co-founder, a brand out of paternity leave. I think most people are far too busy looking after their newborns, but that's pretty amazing. So so that kind of brings us up to 2021, and then you started obviously the coming up with the concept. What was the drive behind this being your first model, and forgive my pronunciation, the Froment?
Yeah, that's right. Format, yes.
Format.
Yeah. So I mean, I think very early on, Matt and we actually had not two different concepts, but I think I had more of a kind of a explorer-esque watch, a more like fieldy watch in mind, and Matt is a trained technical diver, so his was very much a diver watch in mind. But we weren't too fixed on anything, and we just kind of fused our ideas into this watch. But of course, it turned out to be a diver watch, and my concept still lives on our product roadmap, you could say. But no, I think very early on we wanted to make a watch that was built to endure the test of time, whether mountains and or the oceans, because we're both into me hiking and the outdoors, and Matt is very much into diving. So something on that sense. And very early on we mil-spec diver watch, how could we make that? But then actually quite shortly thereafter we started looking into, okay, how can we then mess up the game a little bit? Because the scene of mil-spec diver watches or tools watches, that's also a scene that is quite done and done. And I believe it was Matt who then came up with the idea, okay, how about strategy? Could we actually combine something here with a high-end micro rotor movement into a proper diver's watch? And that was kind of the eureka moment, I think. But it was very, if we drew a line from A to Z, it was very all over the map in terms of concepts also, and a lot of WhatsApp messages with different drawings and things. But yeah, no, I think that was the gist of it.
And I think everyone who watches this video will agree that is the USP, I would suggest, for this particular watch. It's so rare to find a diver's watch of this kind of capability and this look externally, to have a sapphire crystal case back, but actually have a movement that's worth looking at. So that's something obviously we will come to specifically. You've mentioned Schwarz-Etienne as they are the movements you're using. Can you give us a little bit of idea of how that came about and specifically why them?
Yeah, and I think it's pretty safe to say that we are also fans of watch brands, right? So I think specifically Matt has been quite fond of Ming watches, right? Followed them since the early beginning and also their journey, and at least in that time period they were definitely using Schwarz-Etienne, and they helped them establish their brand. And with specifically Matt was very fond of their micro rotor movement in their watches. And then I think that spurred how about we contact Schwarz-Etienne, and they were just so nice. And it's also a fairly small shop, right? And very homey people, and very, very, very quickly we got off to a very good rapport with them. But we didn't know if they would, accept our project either. But I think they took a liking to, of course, our small team, but also the product itself. Like this thing about mixing the genre a little bit. I mean, the diver watch is something that has been kind of done a fair amount, right? So somehow we might have found like a new variation, at least on it, that they took a liking to also.
A sweet spot, and that's one of the things that I really appreciated when I first got a chance to have a look at your watches. They're all in grade 5 titanium, so extremely light, difficult to work with. Anyone who knows about watches understands that there are difficulties in relation to that. I personally really appreciate having an affection for the finishing, the different types of finishing, whether it's brushed or the almost sandblasted effect. I think it's really cool. Tell us a little bit about kind of the inception of this particular model and how you brought it to life, as it were, over the last 3 years, especially with kind of the release of limited editions.
Yeah, so I mean, for us, it was extremely important that our inaugural model, so the black edition, the OG model, was to be very true to the spirit of extreme good legibility, right? So contrast. So that's why a black and white, it doesn't get more contrast than that. Also combined with the super luminova. So if you had an UV light, it would be extremely vivid, the luminous effect of the watch itself. But in the very beginning, it was very important that it should be a watch that you should actually bring out diving. And Matt has brought out his watch diving many times. Now there will probably be a lot of desk divers. That's perfectly fine. But the watch, in its very early beginning, it was meant to be a watch that you should feel safe. And we went into this watch brand, the actual straps to make it safe. We came up with kind of a cool concept there also. But it was just important to say that the first edition, let's make it black. The very, very, like a little bit of a stealth look. So not like something that you might notice on a wrist, but then when you start digging into the details and you start appreciating all these kind of Easter eggs. And yes, working with titanium grade 5 is an absolute nightmare. So getting the sandblasted finish next to the glossy parts, that was not a nice thing for our dear manufacturer to work at. And I can also say that originally it was actually all meant to be sandblasted. That was the original specification. And then we got the first sample back, and it just came out too not bland, but it didn't have enough spark. So we changed the specification, and I think our manufacturer, they shed a little tear on that design choice. But it just I think that thing is really what makes it pop, both from the case, but then when you flip it over to the movement, the same principle applies, that it's, sandblasted finished, all the movement, but then all the edges are beveled like this table, and then they're polished by hand. So that thing about playing with the contrast goes true, but it's not something you notice immediately, of course. But I think that's what, when you start digging into that, that's where you really get a sense of also a relatively high price point, that the amount of small details and the labor that went into it.
Well, that's what good design is all about. And ultimately, for me, when I'm wearing a watch, whether it's, as you say, a desk diver or otherwise, you want something that is going to be durable. And as obvious as that sounds, the fact that it's not going to show scuffs and daily wear and tear as easily as others, say stainless steel, is a real big plus. And the fact that you have that contrast of matte with the shine, really makes a massive difference. So it is obviously a very technical watch. You've got super luminova not only raised on the dial, and you've also got it in the bezel as well. The crown is really satisfying to use, I should say, as is actually the grip around the outside of the bezel, which is not always the case, even though there are plenty of brands that come out with divers watches. They're not as utilitarian as you expect them to be.
And if I might intersect, it's actually also with the bezel, because it's black, you don't notice that is actually an angular bezel. I don't remember if it's 18 or 19 angles, but it was deliberately made for that purpose, that it's actually great to grab. Right. The same with the crown, but it's not like 8 angles that make it very reminiscent of something else, right? So
that shall remain nameless.
But
everyone
exactly.
knows what it is.
Exactly.
So you started off with the black, and then I'm not sure whether this will come out on camera at this moment because of the shot, but we will certainly go in deep. We then have some colours. So talk us through the coloured editions.
So I mean, we came out initially with the black edition. So we launched 22, I guess, Singapore Watch Fair. So we made 100. So the batch is called the first 100. We got some feedback, and of course, people were also crying a little bit about, I would also like some nice colors. And we also wanted to experiment with colors. So then we came out with the red edition and the green edition a year later. So we came back at the Singapore Watch Fair, October of 23. So yeah, you have these.
So if we can get that, I'm not sure if that will come out. But they've got it's got a very lovely red fume dial, and then you have a green fume dial. Which I've had the pleasure of reviewing previously. It's called the Emerald. What's the name for the red? Does that have a specific name?
I think for this sake we remain to call it the red edition.
The red edition.
For my mind, this is how I recall it.
Yeah. So it talked about the inspiration about these specific colours, because it not only, as I understand it, its relation to your co-founder especially, there's the love for diving, but also environmentalism and nature. So talk us through that.
I think in general, just with these specific hues, the red and the green, they actually work very well underwater also. So I'm not the expert on the wavelengths, but basically these specific hues they behave very well when they go below surface. Right. So they will navigate towards black also quite rapidly. So there's other colors that don't do that. So that was part of the story, but it's also for us, we are also as soon as we started digging into colors, we also what do we personally prefer and like, right? And red, we both fond of this reddish tone, and the same with the green one. So we didn't overthink it, I don't think, but definitely there is something on the physical aspect of wavelengths and going below water, that they are still very legible. Of course, not to the same extent as the black one, but they are legible. And specific, the red one, this is the one that my co-founder Matt brings diving all the time, for example.
So it's been tested in the wild.
It has been, and actually, I'm not sure if one can see, but this piece here, this is my personal prototype. So this is 2.5 years ago, or 2.5 years old, and this has been on my wrist pretty much every day. So this also, you asked about, how does it stand up to the test of time on scratches, etc. Because this has been some of the concern we have gotten. How will it wear with the glossy part? We actually think it works extremely well, and that this is specifically a piece, and even the strap. This is 2.5 years worth of wear. So we actually, and the same with Matt's prototype piece. That's also 2.5, and that's been out, at 40 meters in the ocean.
For the benefit of those watching, I can attest that for 2.5 years of continuous wear, this watch is in outstanding condition. Almost the fact I'm not sure I believe you. You've been wearing it for that long.
No, but you can tell. Like for example, the buckle got a nice scratch because I did something silly with it.
Yeah.
But this is effective. Been on my watch for 2.5 years.
The head of the watch is I think watch collectors, tend to kind of be divided into two areas. One that want their watches to remain pristine forever, and others who actually like them to take on a bit of character as they're worn. This has, I think, just enough to show that it is. And the old adage again of a brand that you merely look after watch for the next generation. The idea, if you are going to hand this down, and it does have a little bit of wear, I think is actually a really nice thing. So that's the Frommand. I was a huge fan when I first saw them. I think they're beautifully executed, and specifically the fact that you've got that context of and contrast of having a really high quality Horology movement, 86 hours power reserve, micro rotor, 21,600 vibrations per hour, if I remember correctly. So you almost get the best of both worlds in a model like this. So that's kind of where Atelier Holgur is now. What is the next step?
So there's a fourth piece on that shelf there. So what we are doing actually today or tomorrow, depending on when the video arrives, right, is that we're actually launching a brand new edition, a silver edition, like kind of ghosty, stealthy looking. So again, a fumé dial, right? So same principle where it bleeds towards like a black edge, but essentially with a silver hue. And specifically myself, I'm very, very fond of this because it's not in your face per se as some of the more vivid color. It's a little bit reminiscent of the black one, but it still has that totally different context to it, like different feel to it, the texture of the dial. So specifically the silver edition actually launches right now, kind of.
Imminently. And we will be doing a watch collector review specifically of this piece. So I'll save my viewpoint on this special edition. And they're all each the colours are limited to 8.
Yes. So the fumé edition or the colored editions, they're a piece named pieces 1 of 8. So that's very much right now. And then you also asked, what other stuff are we working on? So I can't disclose specifically, but we have some extremely interesting collaborations coming up, both like some crazy collaboration with artists on one side, and another one with a very well-renowned watchmaker. So there's some very cool things in the midst, and I can't disclose too much. So that's really much on the product side.
Okay, still sports watches or more dressy? Are you able to give us something?
It's within the Frommand amount. Within the Frommand, because we are very fond of kind of how we got the body, the case correct. So very much within that. And outside of that, we are, because you mentioned just the keyword, with ocean conservation. So we are actually really trying to walk the walk with that also, because that is extremely close to our heart. So we've actually just initiated a grant. So it will be released in a couple of weeks, like formally press release and all that. But basically, we've come up with a grant to support small independent explorers and divers on their courses towards ocean conservation. So there will be some very, very cool, not only content, but also actually very cool stories about our watch out, saving just a little bit of the ocean side of things. So that's also, we're trying to work simultaneously on the product itself, of course, but also walking the walk. And Matt himself, I'm not sure if you saw on our own Instagram, But Matt has been out, collecting garbage debris out of the Singapore reef. Doesn't change the whole world, but we are actually trying to do what we can do in our power, being a small fish, you could say.
And ultimately, I think most people who are into watches, they want to be able to identify with not only what the watch itself personifies, but the brand. It's what you're buying into. And I think people who are genuinely interested in this kind of meld of somewhat robust aesthetic, should we say, from the front, but real utilitarian, but not to the point of it being either bland or should we say insufficiently curvaceous for those of us who want something that can be a bit more rounded, and especially if it is going to be a desk diver, which unfortunately some of it will be. It's still going to look good whether it's in a boardroom like we are today, or out with a shorts and t-shirt. I've said it before, I was a great fan when I saw these watches previously. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you today, Asbjørn. Thank you so much.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
That's another edition of The Watch Collector. Thanks so much for joining. Please check out Atelier Holgur. It's a phenomenal story, and make sure that you look into them. For now, that's enough. We'll see you next time.